Calcutta Research Group is now a research institute, primarily known especially for their seminal and quite sustained work on migration and refugee studies in both the South Asian but also the international context, and increasingly for other work in peace studies, in right now in urban studies, and also in various other domains of increasingly we are starting to work on climate change, and we've actually been working on it on climate change and various other domains. Today is the beginning of the online course that we have put together, Making and Unmaking of Cities, in which has been possible because of the fellowship that Professor Shomadar was conferred by the CIFAR, that is the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. We are very glad that we could pull this course together. More on that and how we came about to uh, conceive of the course and what its implications are. I will ask Professor Ranobi Shomadar to first introduce himself and then to talk about this course.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Ranobi Shomadar and I have been associated with the CRG since its birth. I was its founder director, and along with 5 or 6 friends of mine, we established this group, you wouldn't believe, probably in a bar or a cafe in the mid-90s. And then it started seriously working 2, 3 years later. And we do not know when the seriousness crept into us and we started working. Shomota and has already told you that we work on issues of migration, borders, partitions, partition-related violence, displacement, bunch of issues. But we have also worked on issues of citizenship, law, gender and violence. We have worked on labor. And in recent years, our focus on labor has been uh, more. Uh, all I can say on this occasion is that our engagement with the question of the city began probably from 2008 time, when we started working on a theme of the migrant and the neoliberal city. And from the title, you can see that our approach to the city, in some sense, was of an outsider, in the sense, how does a migrant look at a city? The migrant stays in the city. You cannot imagine a city without the migrant. At the same time, when you speak of citizenship, theories of citizenship, ideals of citizenship, our speculations about future of citizenship, etc., in some way, the citizen migrant, this combined figure or the double figure, escapes us. And we tried to see through a 3 year study of Mumbai, Delhi, and Calcutta the fate of the migrants or the role of the migrants in making of these 3 big cities. So in Mumbai, possibly for the first time, or maybe the second or third, if I remember now, that 2 exhaustive studies of what is called the largest slum of Asia, the Dharavi slums, studies were done, how people lived, how people made their livelihoods, the culture of solidarity in the slum areas, etc., and the role of the migrants, the life of the migrants in the city. In case of Delhi, I remember again one of the earliest studies of how the city expands like an empire. So one may call it's kind of an inland empire where Delhi becomes the national capital region. So we wrote on the particular laws, the governing structures of what is called the National Capital Region, and what it means for the migrant. Does the migrant have a role in this National Capital Region? Of course, we had also our work on Calcutta. The other engagement with city was on violence, and we did studies on the the famous or infamous violence of 1946 that is supposed to have finalized the decision to partition India. So the Calcutta violence, what is called the Great Calcutta Riots of 1946, we did a study on that. And finally, we also did studies on the making of new towns and the new towns at the expense of agricultural land, at the expense of uprooting of thousands of people. These works have become very important. We are very happy that universities, scholars, they use our work regularly. And so when I got a letter from Professor Simon Goldman and now my dear friend Simon to join the discussion and join the research group, I was more than happy. I knew that I had a particular style and a point of engaging with the whole question of urban future. And at times, I have learned new things, new approaches. At times, I have felt that whatever I have learned also, in a way, reinforced my own ideas of how in the global south cities are made unmade and what is there in the global south for so-called the uh, common urban future if there is something common to that. So my association with CIFAR has been for me enriching, and I think for our research collective, which you may have noticed by now, is made of all kinds of people, and it's not only professional researchers. In that sense, it's really a kind of a dilettantes collective, people from all walks of life. They just join in if they find some meaning in it. In that sense, it's kind of the 19th century, those societies of enlightenment that we had in Calcutta nearly 200 or at least 150 years ago. Now, on the theme, I do not want to really say much, not only much, I do not want to say at all, given the varieties that we have and given the fact that Simon will be giving you the inaugural comments, inaugural lecture. We all will be listening to him. I will make, therefore, only very few remarks on how, from, let us say, from the point of a southern city, we can look at the theme of the urban future. And it is very good that we have the theme of, or the sub-theme, if you like, the making and unmaking of cities, because urban future, it's not a seamless imagination, particularly humanity's urban future, because no future is made without a process of making and unmaking. Interestingly, this idea of making and unmaking, even though presumes or has a violent process of restructuring, but it also generates in us, possibly not unexpectedly, a desire for a clean and better urban future. And cities produce this desire, they are desiring machines. So the fault lines of past at times prompt us to address the cleavages whenever we think of the future of our cities. But on the other hand, the reality of making and unmaking remains. So metropolises, small towns, colonial cities, port cities, railway towns, all these are made and unmade. Prosperous cities and ghost townships, with their contrast, haunt our imaginations of a possible urban future if you happen to travel through India. Let's say if you visit the UNESCO heritage site and this famous architectural wonder, Taj Mahal, in the bustling city of Agra, which was the medieval capital of the Mughal Empire, you will hear of everyone will tell you that you must travel a nearby city, which is a ghost city. It's only 35 kilometers away, and its name is Fatehpur Sikri, an earlier capital of the same empire. abandoned due to water scarcity in 1610, and now a settlement lying in ruins. So Fatehpur Sikri's magnificent urban design of centuries back make you wonder the circumstances that led to its decay and its forlorn state now. Yet this contrast is perhaps the cue to imagining a desirable urban future in which temporality plays a big role. For the making and the unmaking dialectic works through time, linear, but also in the form of, if you recall Walter Benjamin's very famous phrase, homogeneous empty time. That is to say, time makes us aware of the fault lines in our social and economic practices. Also, it makes us aware of our heterogeneous future making practices. Now, the variety of urban forms which I want to indicate probably makes any standardized imagination of an urban future impossible. Yet, and this is one more paradox which we live with and we have to live with, it is precisely this variety that provokes the idea of a habitable city life, a collective but not homogeneous existence, urban justice that would be based on right to city. The other thing that I want to point out is that this making unmaking dynamics in cities buffeted or soaked by winds of climate change, certainly impoverished or enriched by flights of capital and whims of technology, and also, but also they are made and still unmade. Recall Gaza. We don't have to, think of the past history through the bloody processes of violence and punitive campaigns. And that's to make a city work. If you recall the neglected epidemiological transformation of a city, then think of the city of Mumbai marshalling its labor force through plague. The epidemic peaked in early 1897 with a mortality rate of 75-85 to 85%. Labor fled the city. Business and commerce stopped. The Epidemic Diseases Act 1897, with which the government has wanted to tackle the current or the very recent COVID-19 pandemic, was enacted to tackle the bubonic plague. The law was meant for containment of epidemics by providing special powers to the state required for the implementation of containment measures to control the spread of the disease. And as the disease spread to Pune and colonial controls became more severe, recall the first national martyrs of our country, the Chapekar brothers, early modern Indian revolutionaries assassinated W.C. Rand, the British plague commissioner of the city, after the city's public was frustrated with the vandalism from the officers and soldiers appointed by him. Plague influenced the making of the working class in Mumbai for the next 20 years. Public health infrastructure, cordoning techniques, emergence of caregivers on a mass scale, policing of unsafe quarters, and most significant, governmental attempts at large scale behavioral modification of people. These are parts of the same epidemiological transformation of the city. And we cannot forget, of course, when we speak of the southern cities, the biggest divide in the city is between the official city and the city underground. We may extend a likely analogy between the 19th century story of the Underground Railroad in North America, transporting fugitive slaves to safety in the North, and the 21st centuries of South, including, and I include cities of Southern Europe, crisscrossed by routes and trails of migrant passages. So Marseille, Naples, Athens, Beirut, Karachi, Kolkata, Mumbai, Bangkok, Johannesburg, Cairo, Mexico, all these house huge underground cities. Violent and harsh local border regimes exist in these cities. Yet, these borders are negotiated on daily basis by migrants, illegal dwellers, criminals, petty traders, sex workers, and workers in informal sectors. If we focus on these contested situations, if possible, uh, in this course, we shall be able to reverse or at least see how the image of a dangerous border is reversed into one of a space negotiated by routes, passages, and people. So these are, in a way, non spaces of a city, yet these are not only non spaces or cities of refuge, if you want to use this famous biblical phrase brought back by Derrida, they are also birthplaces of new words and lexicons, of flags of what one philosopher has called the new cosmopolitanism towards which cities ideally strive. So I shall only end with this comment that all these bring us to the fundamental question of the political ecology of a city. I cannot find any suitable alternative to the idea of political ecology that can make sense of the myriads of phenomena marking our urban present and with breathtaking speed propelling southern urbanism as the motor of global urban growth, but towards an uncertain future. Let us not forget that many of these cities are marked by what Michel Foucault had once called popular illegalism. Populist government tolerates in these cities such illegalism. In a sense, the lives of the popular classes are marked by this is counter conduct, that is popular illegalism, counter to the prescribed norm of urban existence. The experiences of new municipalism, in some sense, provide us with a rich repertoire of a possible new urban ecology and urban coexistence. That, in a sense, is the nature of the urban biopolitics today also. An acknowledgement of various claims to the city and its dialogic order become the true two prerequisites towards working for an urban future at whose heart will be the presence of the popular classes. Thank you, and I hope that this course through the 14 or the 15, 16 sessions will bring out various dimensions, what we may call the best practices of urban coexistence, some of the neglected histories of improving the biopolitical life of the lower orders, and make the city a much more habitable place for the popular classes. And I'm very happy that my friend Professor Simon Goldhill consented to give the inaugural lecture, and we shall all be waiting eagerly waiting to listen to his presentation. Shomata, thank you.
Thank you, Ronavida. Thank you for also explaining the processes through which, although you did not actually say it, but it was apparent from your presentation, how we came about the sub-themes that we did come about. So that it also shows the way of thinking of how we arrived where we are today. It is my pleasure to be able to introduce Professor Simon Goldhill, who has already given us the two-sentence description of himself, but I'll still do it formally. Professor Simon Goldhill is a professor of Greek literature and culture at University of Cambridge and a fellow of the British Academy, among other things, and as well as a co-director of Humanities Urban Future at Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CIFAR. And Professor Goldhill is the author of many important volumes dealing with 5th century Greek tragedy, late antiquity, 19th century studies, especially the relation between antiquity and religion in Victorian culture, and many important books in various fields, but also exceptionally exciting books like The Buried Life of Things, How Objects Made History in the 19th Century Britain. And I have only deliberately picked up exceptional names, some of which I have read. Foucault's Virginity, Freud's couch, Scott's buttocks, and Bronto's grave, which is yet another way of thinking about a city. And what I just started reading yesterday, Queer Cambridge. We are extremely grateful to Professor Goldhill for delivering the inaugural lecture, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope you can hear me clearly. And it's a great pleasure. I only wish I was in Calcutta, but as Ranabir is not yet there, it would have been a disappointment of me not to see you there. And I hope to see you there soon. And one of the things I hope I'm going to do today is to learn from you too, from your questions, because my background is really, as Ranabir hinted, is in the global north. And I think some of what I'm going to be talking about today is on certain values of the global north, which have been very important for urbanism. And I hope that I will learn from you where I need to go next. Now, what I'm interested in is the language of urbanism today. That's to say that if you're going to start imagining a future, let alone making a future, you need the words to do it, you need the vision to do it. And I'm fascinated at the moment by a set of words that have become what you might call virtues. That is to say, they're unimpeachable values. That is, even if you argue about what form they should take, how they should be embedded and embodied in the city, they're nonetheless values that nobody challenges, at least nobody challenges adequately. And I think these are words that I'm going to try and explore at great length in a book that's going to be written in the next couple of years. And the first 5 terms I'm looking at are efficiency, care, cleanliness, civility, and justice. And with each of those words, which I think are absolutely central to the way we make and unmake cities, they're the words by which we define our projects: efficiency, care, cleanliness, civility, and justice. I want to try and explore through their history and through their use the way in which they are, in fact, not self-evident good things, but are actually words with a complicated, difficult history. And they come not just trailing clouds of problems, but in a way that actually creates problems that are not being recognized. And with a word like efficiency, we can say immediately how important it is for the terms that Ranabir was talking about in his opening remarks. Efficiency is about temporality. It's about saving time. It's about doing something to time in the city. But it's also about how the city gets made. And what I found fascinating in my work on this is how little people understand about the history of the word efficiency. Now, it's not hard to show that efficiency is a word that many people would support. In the name of sustainability and resilience, everybody these days will encourage that buildings should be efficient in their energy usage. We want green architecture to be part of a circular economy that celebrates not just the reduction of waste, but a dynamic that promises stability in the face of the threat of the disruptive chaos of climate change or extractivist economics. And perhaps the term that the person who made efficiency crucial in architecture is Le Corbusier. That is to say, he insisted that the city should be regarded as a machine, and consequently that we should use the technologies of the city always to increase the efficiency of the machine. And it's interesting that if you went back into the 19th century, the model communities of Bourneville, which William Harvey made for Cadbury, or Robert Owen's New Lanark, or if you go up to date to 20th century to Frankfurt's ideas, they were designed to make a good life for a working family. But what Le Corbusier insisted on was that now a city should be run on efficiently. It should be run efficiently. Value was invested in the machine of the city running efficiently. And the smart city does the same thing. It insists that we should have a steerable, ultimately integrated and efficient machine. And transport, which we've been talking about a bit already, has become a crucial area for efficiency because Obviously, a city like a shark needs to move to stay alive, and we need to have transport in the city. And this has resulted in some quite extraordinary social developments. The building of roads through the middle of cities, motorways through a city like Caracas in Venezuela, an 8-lane motorway, which can only be crossed on 2 bridges that are regulated, that create either side of the road a rich area and a poor area. And at the moment, if you wanted to sum up why efficiency is particularly interesting to me, you may have heard that in America, they have formed a Department of Government Efficiency under the Elon Musk, right? And it's an institutional title George Orwell would be quite proud of, I think, this idea of government efficiency, which basically means firing people and reducing government altogether. What's interesting is that even people who hate Donald Trump don't contest that efficiency is a good thing. And of course, all of us at some point or another have huffed and puffed about the trains being late or being sent from window to window to get the right form, or when your computer doesn't work. We want things to work. As it is said, if system is the dominant model for shaping modern knowledge, we want our operating systems, our support systems, our ecosystems to work. I mean, who wants disruption, disorder, contingency, boredom, waste, annoyance, anger, hindrance, all the things that are opposed to efficiency? How could efficiency not be a virtue? Well, I want to suggest to you today that we have to understand something about the history of the term, first of all, if we're going to understand why it's a problem. And let me start with some pretty interesting history. The first thing to say is that before the late 19th century, efficiency was simply not an interest. There's no word in Greek, there's no word in Latin, there's no word in the Bible. If we go back into the deep past, nobody was concerned with efficiency then. And if you went into the middle of the 19th century, it actually begins to develop in physics. The idea that a machine has efficiency is okay. It's formalized as a mechanical principle with a technical and limited meaning, which measured the balance of effort of energy into a machine against the effort produced. Right? It's a straightforward physical law of machines. That's what efficiency is. And when you say when Le Corbusier said we should treat the city as a machine, he's trying to suggest that the inputs and outputs of energy can be measured and numerically valued. Now, the persuasiveness of Le Corbusier's idea, of course, depends on that scientific basis, but it also depends on a very selective blindness about the ways in which a city is not like a machine. What happened in the late 19th century is that the idea of efficiency moved, and it moved from that early beginnings as a machine into something else. It starts with somebody like Charles Darwin, who thought that natural selection was a particularly efficient way of nature working. And he starts to apply efficiency to a complex system. But it's there briefly in Darwin, and only briefly in Darwin. It doesn't become a real word of obsession, and the way I think it is a word of obsession for urbanists. It becomes an obsession at the beginning of the 20th century. So if you were going to do one of those funny little Google engrams to show the word, you'd find, as it were, efficiency barely has a mention until about 1900, and suddenly it goes through the roof. It becomes an absolute craze. It becomes a key term of politics. In fact, it was recognized as such. And one guy said, it is the most used vocable, the most used word in politics in the 1900 was efficiency. How did it become such an important term? Well, first of all, there are going to be two ways we're going to talk about it in the first 20 years of the 20th century. The first is going to be between national and personal efficiency, and the second is going to be industrial efficiency. So let's start with that strange term that you may not have ever come across, national efficiency. And in order to understand that, we have to understand something about imperialism, British imperialism, something you may be well familiar with, but also the Boer War in the end of the 19th century, the Boer War, which was an incredible shock to British imperialism. If you remember, at the end of the 19th century, white South African, Dutch-based farmers rebelled against the British Empire. And the British army went in and actually kept losing to the farmers, as the press kept calling them. And it was an incredible shock to the system, because how could a bunch of farmers, as the press called them, defeat the might of the British Imperial Army? How could the imperial administration have failed so badly? The Boer War, I'm quoting now, revealed organizational weaknesses, not only in the army, but the whole machinery of government. And the military leadership and political brokers were publicly pilloried in the press and on the streets. And as the disastrous defeats of the army stretched into long-term guerrilla warfare, this is the beginning of guerrilla warfare in the world, the British were incredibly ill prepared for it. And it led to policies of scorched earth and concentration camps that exacerbated public anger into moral outrage. And the backlash against these failures, the sense of national humiliation, took the form of an intense debate about national efficiency. And this is why efficiency became a buzzword, the debate about national efficiency. And the debate was driven by politicians like Lord Rosebery, like Lloyd George, Winston Churchill, by public reformers like Rowntree, and by campaigning journalists and activists like Stead, and extreme ideologues as well. We could sum it up like this. This is how one of the historians of national efficiency sums up what it is. Its ideology is an attempt to discredit the habits, beliefs, and institutions that put British as a handicap in their competition with foreigners, and to commend instead social organization, urban organization that learnt from the successes of particularly Germany and Japan. Indeed, there became, across the press, I quote, a desire to see all important departments of national life staffed by earnest young men aware of the demands of national efficiency. But what is national efficiency? What are the demands of national efficiency? Well, the first is that every citizen should become, I quote now from Beatrice Webb, the great socialist writer and founder of the Fabians, every citizen should become a healthier, nobler, and more efficient being. It's a fantastic list of adjectives, isn't it? You should be healthier. Well, health is a good public good. We'd say that now, wouldn't we? We want people to be healthy. Nobler is a classic piece of socialism. Now we want the worker, not the noble, to be noble, right? That's fine. But look how it concludes ringingly, more efficient. That's what we want every citizen to be. It's a surprise that efficiency trumps health and education. Why do men need enough to eat? Physical efficiency. Here's how the famous journalist William Stead put it. If we are to hold our own among the nations in the severe commercial struggle that lies before us, the mass of the people must be physically and mentally efficient. Right? As Darwin suggests, in the struggles to come, only the efficient will make it. The alternative is extinction. But it's also specifically an urban question. James Cantley was a famous campaigning doctor, and he published his book, I quote the title, Physical Efficiency, a review of the deleterious effects of town life upon the population of Britain and suggestions for their arrest. This is 1906. It's the privileged medical account. And despite being a medical account, its ideology shines through. And as well as nationalism, national efficiency, imperialism leads his thought. He says we need efficiency for the imperial mission. And he compares different races' efficiencies. This leads him to cover all aspects of daily life in the city in a way that now looks extraordinary. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from this book of 1906. Boots and shoes have perhaps more to do with efficiency than any other part of our dress. Or, as a hygienic agent, singing is of national importance. Right? Singing should therefore be taught as a means of promoting national physical efficiency. Well, wow. Singing is a route to efficiency. And then he says, pickles and cocktails are a threat to American efficiency. Right? This is the Medical Times. And America, bizarre, absolutely outrageously, is described as a nation of all white people. Quite extraordinary that, it's not sure what racial blinkers allowed him to say such a thing, but it shows you clearly the imperial project being fundamentally racist. But Cantley sees the city as his enemy. Right? The city is what stops individuals being healthy, or in his terms, efficient. The efficiency of each citizen is all. It makes no sense to him at all in the first decade of the 20th century to talk about the efficiency of a city. Efficiency is not about infrastructure, it's about people. Now, America was particularly obsessed with efficiency at all levels, and Europeans regularly turn to America as the best place for efficiency. The phrase that gets used in the American journalism again and again is mental, moral, and physical efficiency. Again, listen to that three adjectives: mental, moral, and physical efficiency. National efficiency was a particular concern of the Roosevelt administration, and he linked it to the conservation of natural resources. But there was a particular concern with personal efficiency, with Cantley. British thought it was national interest that each person should be more efficient. The Americans tended to turn personal efficiency into a sort of self-help word. And I'm going to look at one example, a guy called James Purinton. There are about 20 books I could have chosen, and they're all maybe similar, but I've chosen him because he's a particularly interesting one. Because personal efficiency was a real craze, and everybody recognized it as such at the time. What's interesting is they all say the same thing. It's really modern to talk about efficiency. Efficiency is the hot topic of the day. Right? They know it's being invented in the 20th century as a criterion. If you want to know what personal efficiency is, here is a summary from the opening of his book called Personal Efficiency. Efficiency is the difference between wealth and poverty, fame and obscurity, power and weakness, health and disease, growth and death, hope and despair. Efficiency makes kings of us all. Only efficiency conquers fate. Every man's life is a battleground, with fate and efficiency struggling for possession. Fate is against him, efficiency is for him, and all man's forces are lined up on one side or another. Where do you stand? Have you marshaled your thoughts, your acts and emotions under efficiency's banner? If not, prepare to be assailed, overwhelmed and dismembered by fate. The opposite of efficiency is extinction. And when he wants to sum up what it is, he says, efficiency is the science of self-management. I think a contemporary engineer would find that just baffling. Efficiency is the science of self-management. And what it leads to is a whole series of advice on self-care. He's got a wonderful test, 30 questions, which you have to answer, giving a score of between 0 and 100 for how you score on it. I won't give you all 30 questions, but I'll give you a few to give a sense of what this craze is like. Number 12 is, are you correcting your known weaknesses, mental, financial, social, and spiritual? Number 13, have you discovered which foods, baths, and exercises increase your energy and heighten your mentality? Do you breathe deeply and hold an erect posture? Right? Do you drink 3 pints of pure water daily? Right? And then 28, do you enjoy art, music, literature, and the presence of little children? 30, do you have a great love in your life to steady, cheer, and empower you? And the mix of categories is quite extraordinary, dizzying. It's almost comically concerned with American bourgeois life. I mean, how does art and music fit with the presence of small children as a criterion? It's a very strange way of thinking about efficiency in a city, but that's how it is. If you're a woman, you get to go to domestic efficiency. And 2 of the questions there that get shouted at you are, number 1, have you studied at least 3 modern schools of diet, such as the Lahman, the Luss, the Christian, or the Kellogg system? And then, do you receive regularly the monthly list of publications of the US Department of Agriculture? That's what it means to be an efficient woman. Quite extraordinary. But the promise is great. The day is coming. I'm quoting from the guy again, Purinton, when the labor of a man's body, the light of his mind, the love of his heart, will be scientifically merged to make his work a series of masterpieces. And when that day comes, man will be efficient. Even more bizarrely, H.G. Wells, the famous writer of Humanity's Future, contributes in 1901 with some ideas about sex. He says a man or a woman ought to have sexual intercourse. Few people are mentally, morally, or physically in health without it. And for anyone, there's a minimum and a maximum, and between which lies complete efficiency. Find out your equation, I say, and keep efficient. There you go. It's fairly striking stuff, right? And there was actually, in his case, he thought that being efficient led to a whole way of living a life. And he says the alternative between living fully, beautifully, and efficiently will be to die. Again, the opposite of efficiency is extinction. And in his case, it led to the politics of eugenics and euthanasia. So it's efficiency that leads, as it were, eventually to the Nazi Party claims that we should be killing people in the state who don't match up to the notions of efficiency. There was a co-efficience club and men dedicated to pushing efficiency. It included the Webbs, the socialists, Haldane, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, and they discussed one day what part are the coloured races destined to play in the future development of civilization. And you won't be surprised to know that the conclusion is the necessary superiority and exploitation of others by the British imperial powers. And Arnold White's book, Efficiency and Empire, shows exactly how efficiency is tied up not just with imperialism, but racism. He says, first of all, that aristocrats are the most efficient, which is why they rule. But in his chapter on moral inefficiency, this is in case you're wondering what moral efficiency might be, he says, bad foreign Jews are the enemy within. Rule by foreign Jews is being set up. Racism always loves to play Cassandra. These Jews have too much influence on the state. And of course, if the empire is to last, our family life must be protected. So lock up your women. So efficiency comes as an imperial, racist, sexist idea about self-care. Now, the concern then, prompted by political and military crisis, it makes it an urban virtue, but only by extolling a set of bourgeois, ideological, normative injunctions that actually lead to eugenicist policies, euthanasia, that rely on racist and class-based claims of moral inefficiency. That's where we get our term efficiency from. That's the first history of it. The second history is goes alongside it, which is industrial efficiency. And here, the name of Frederick Taylor is iconic and still important for the whole history of urbanism. He published his great book, The Principles of Scientific Management, in 1911. And he begins by quoting President Roosevelt that the conservation of our national resources is preliminary to the larger question of national efficiency. So national efficiency, that I've just been talking about, is linked to industrial efficiency from the start. And what Taylor did is he went into the Bethlehem Steel Company, comparing how workers moved tons of pig iron. And he found methods of increasing the efficiency of the task by a mixture of psychological encouragement, positive management, economic incentive, and empirical observation. He knows that the need for greater efficiency is widely felt. And he needs this, he says, what we do in the workplace will get us on the road to national efficiency. And he says, what we need, he says, is a trained, competent man, and our duty, as well as our opportunity, lies in systematically cooperating to train and make this competent man. And Taylor's hope for a systematic transformation is a way of making it coherent planning of a factory, and then the hope of scaling that up to an institutional area. What I found fascinating in reading Taylor's book, and very few people read Taylor's book these days, they just talk about Taylorism, is that he requires efficiency in the employer and the employee, and, this should interest Allenby, an equitable division of the profits of their joint effort. Now, both of these principles, that there should be close cooperation between workers and management, and an equitable division of profits, were quickly forgotten in Taylorism. And it's fascinating that ideas of efficiency immediately quash any counter-hegemonic ideas that might lead to a different sort of activism. The authoritarian control of workers by management and the insistence on increased levels and speed of working led as soon as 1912, right, to a special House committee in America's politics deciding to put a ban on the use of stopwatches in the army, the navy, and then the civil service. And I don't know if anybody here has seen Charlie Chaplin's film Modern Times, but already in the 1930s, we're parodying the idea of the factory line as doing something terrible to the worker and making them work at a speed they cannot do. The logic of industrial efficiency becomes material for comedy quite quickly. But Taylor's transformation into Taylorism marks the foundation of our contemporary obsession with efficiency as a virtue of modern society. Almost as soon as Taylor's principles were adopted, they were being contested, however, not just by the unions who didn't want to work faster and harder, but also because we have a question of what is a machine. As Castells asks of Toyota's automobile plant planning, how could you get rid of uncertainty, insecurity, and contingency from human activity? If efficiency treats a human as a machine, what is being lost and what is being done to that person? And efficiency based on the physics of a machine, when applied to a human, what does it have to ignore to make that case? Fascinatingly, this became part of the politics of the Cold War and resistance to fascism. Both British and American writers constructed the political opposition of democracy to Hitler's National Socialism and the communism of the Soviet Union as an excess of efficiency. Psychologists try to drive the idea of a democratic type, and the democrat is intelligent, open-minded, autonomous human capable of exercising his or her psychological freedom, not a machine. And that's in contrast to the authoritarian personality, which Adorno and others wrote a 1,000-page book on in 1950, the authoritarian personality. And you may come across the Milgram experiments, that are the most famous of such experiments, showing that people, when treated by authority, could act in such a way that they would actually kill other humans, thinking they were doing some good for them. And brainwashing becomes a great fear of the 1950s as a response to both communism and the heritage of fascism, which you might have seen in the political film The Manchurian Candidate. And so the goose-stepping Nazi soldiers or the Soviet Red Square parades were taken to embody a loss of autonomy, an unthinking obedience, dangerous efficiency, all in contrast with the American or British individual hero who thinks outside the box and triumphs over all adversity by independence and freedom. And there's a sort of direct line between Davy Crockett and Luke Skywalker. So it becomes a cliche of descriptions of the Holocaust to describe concentration camps as examples of grotesque efficiency and industrial killing, right? Without thinking about what that tells us about our own factories, our own workplaces, our own systems. So it's interesting to me that when we talk about efficiency in that way, we have to think about what the opposite of efficiency is. And this was one space where I found some very interesting work in the Global South that actually did help me, which is the work of Anastasia Pilyavsky and Thomas Spricolli, where they talk about the ethics of efficacy, and this is in North India, in terms of Gunda Raj, as they put it, the rule of toughs. And they describe in their way, Pilyavsky and Spricolli, the career path of a Gunda who rises from thuggish youthful crime, murder, theft, enforcement, in service of older leaders to become a leader in their own right, and often successful businessmen or politicians, with ranks of younger Gundas at their bidding to do their dirty work. They quote, I'm quoting them, more than a third of India's parliament elected in 2014 face criminal charges, including kidnapping, murder, and rape. Many own guns, and some even stand for elections or run their constituencies from prison. And what's interesting about this to me is this idea of efficacy, the idea that you get things done. That's what makes these politicians powerful. They can act as patrons to the people who support them, And that way they get political power and social power. And now such a system of efficacy, getting things done, challenges the ethics of politics. And it's not too hard to see how Trump's America, where getting things done has become a mantra, where figures of a criminal past are lauded for such efficacy. They get things done. So it's interesting to me that in contemporary urban living across the world nowadays, efficacy is presented as the counter to systemic efficiency. Now, efficacy, therefore, is complicit not just with systemic inefficiency, but with the systemic disruption of political system and the allowance of criminality and in misuse of power. Now, the unintended consequences of the pursuit of efficiency, and when efficiency and efficacy clash, is particularly obvious in transport and transport systems, which some of you are working on, I heard. Now, the outline of this we know fully well. The history of transport is pretty well known by now. That is, in the middle of the 19th century, and I'm not going to go back to Roman Empire here, but in the middle of the 19th century, road construction has become absolutely crucial. Haussmann's Paris, for example, is the icon of civic splendor for a new future and a beacon of modern urban living across Europe and the whole world. Wide new boulevards, new radial order of city roads, which cleared the slums and increased speed of movement. Now, they built the city like that in order to stop the threat of revolutionary politics from people. So this was not about making the world a better place. It was about power controlling itself. Right? But road increased the potential and speed for workers to reach factories and other places of work. They're fundamental to the city's lived experience. Now, of course, Paris then changed with cafes or whatever, but because of the recognized benefits of such circulation, the efficiency of transport and public travel and public transport became a key aspect of urban planning. This is when we first get the idea of the wrong side of the tracks, because railways and roads drove barriers through communities as well as linking them. The city of Caracas, I mentioned, has 8-lane motorway right through the middle of the town, which divides the rich from the poor. And to cross that road, there are 2 bridges, both of which are carefully regulated and controlled to allow the workers from the slums to service the high-rise apartments. And it's still an extraordinary fact that the social violence of building large-scale roads through cities continues in almost every city in the world. At the moment, Cairo is the one that's going particularly grimly. So there are 3 particular consequences of the insistence of speed of travel. It's interesting that in London, which had a public bus service into the middle of the 19th century, they only had timetables in 1924. Generally, for about 70 odd years, people just waited for a bus or made use of one if it came along. Right? Underground trains had no timetables either, much later. But now if you go on the underground in London, as there is in many places across the global north, you'll find a digital clock announcing how quickly the next train is going to arrive. In fact, the next 3 trains are going to arrive. And Simon Cool, who wrote a wonderful history of impatience, comments, as intervals between the trains dropped, their perceived duration increasingly diverged upwards from their actual duration, generating continued frustration at the perceived inefficiency of the journey overall. In fact, patients hurried because tube travel was more efficient. So the quicker the trains, the more you worried and the more you hurried. As tube passengers had to wait less time for trains, they became more keenly aware of the time they did have to wait. Accidents caused by hurry were prefigured by the technological development of the tube. And then we get lots of signage coming into the road saying, move down the carriage, mind the gap, stand on the left, trying to push people in as quickly as possible into the way. The display of efficiency produces an increased desire for efficiency, a growing anxiety about blockage. Right? Where early 20th century discussions of efficiency saw mental efficiency as a desire to make your mind better, now, right, what we find is efficiency produces anxiety about it being, about the compelling and compulsive efficiency of the factory line becomes a way you live your life in the city. That's the first way in which efficiency and transport change our sense of temporality. The second way is something slightly different. It's the way in which in cities, transport changes, the infrastructure of transport changes the financial way in which the city is conceived. House prices in most major cities follow ease of access to transport. The closer you are to transport, the more expensive the houses are. Transport lays down lines by which the grid of wealth is articulated across the urban landscape. Right? The further the public transporter worker lives, the harder it is for a worker to be efficient, because the longer the travel times, the less time there is to work. Right? So the transport system that increases efficiency actually produces the inefficient worker. Right? It means that the stability it creates, and it's a very long-term infrastructure, is a form of social order that maintains the status quo of impoverishment and privilege. So the second consequence is that the demand for efficient urban travel is the inevitable politicization and financialization of the urban space it creates. And the third consequence is a product of the cost and long-term duration of public transport. The financialization of space that the building infrastructure produces makes it a highly politicized and contested venture, even in the wealthiest West cities. And it goes to the heart not just of economics or politics, but the temporality of the urban. The calculation of the social and financial implications of such projects is about scale, the long-term time scale. If you put in one railway, you're not going to take it out in a hurry. So what are you doing to the state when you do it? What are the efficient statements doing? Now, of course, it's no surprise there's a big difference in the global north and the global south in transport infrastructure. What interests me most of all is that the reducing the potential for efficient travel reduces the potential for social change, social travel too. The relationship between housing, labor, and transport is one of the most lasting problems of urban planning. But what does the conceptualization of efficiency as a virtue play? Well, how does it play a part in the failure to transform urban space into a less divisive, less conflictual, less impoverishing environment? What does the modeling of a city as a machine conceal? And above all, in whose interests? So let me conclude. The value of efficiency is troped through the model of the physics of a machine. But the term efficiency itself has a quite different dynamic in its history. From the turn of the 20th century, efficiency became a buzzword for personal growth, mental, moral, and physical, designed to make each citizen an improved citizen, and on the other, to increase national efficiency. And that efficiency is racial, imperial, bourgeois, and above all, capitalist. It's designed to make a worker and designed to make someone who works all the time. The more you can work, the harder you can work, the better you are in that respect. The taking of efficiency into the industrial sphere changes the scale of that, and it raises the question of how like a machine a human should be, can be. And it becomes part of the rhetoric of how we understand our national identity in terms of America and Britain versus Germany or the Soviet Union. But nonetheless, Le Corbusier, following from this, makes the city a machine. He made efficiency of the machine the virtue of the urban environment. But we have to remember again and again how urban living is not inhabiting a machine. The desire for efficiency works to repress not just the anxiety and compulsions of increasing efficiency, but also the consequences of planning and construction efficient systems, which builds a map of class and impoverishment. But I think most saliently, to go back to what Ranabir said at the beginning, the advances of technology, which are crucial to increased efficiency, better machines, aim to reduce time. The premise of efficiency and convenience of every technology is it will save time. Saving time for what is not often asked. The sixth of Benjamin Franklin's famous list of virtues is, I quote, "Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary action." That is, for him, life is constant labor, like a perfected machine, where what is useful and necessary seems to be self-evident, not a question of living. There's no waste, no waiting. Efficiency promises control, no contingency, no chance, no encounter. exactly what Richard Sennett would say is the essence of urban living. The promise of technology is that we will no longer face blockages of temporality. I quote from Denby: "The revolution will end by changing the nature of time itself, thereby altering the way we live, work, seek pleasure, and gather together. We shall achieve simultaneity, ending the gap between desire and fulfillment. We shall no longer wait. Labor-saving technology accelerates urban living to increase time for, well, more labor. Waiting is the enemy of efficiency. We should," Franklin insists, "lose no time." But how can time not be lost? What fantasy of inhabiting time is enacted by this principle of efficiency? William Henry Davis was a Welsh-born tramp, a hobo, who walked across America in 1911. He wrote his most famous poem that begins, "What is this life if full of care we have no time to stop, stand and stare?" In conscious resistance to the logic of efficiency, Davis wants to stand still and just look at a world of beauty. There's an aesthetics to set against the insistence of no waste, no waiting, the industrialization of society. He's a tramp. When Franklin demands we lose no time, Davis imagines what it would be like to have no time. The poem ends, "A poor life this, if full of care. We have no time to stand and stare." Well, there's an arresting irony in that word poor. The immediate sense, of course, is moral and aesthetic. It's going to be an impoverished life. But the mavens of efficiency would agree. If you stand and stare, the answer will be economic impoverishment. Where efficiency is concerned, economics and morality go hand in hand. You can't separate economics from the aesthetic, the social, the ethical. Now, of course, words change meaning over time, and the language of efficiency from the early 20th century will look outlandish or incomprehensible today. I mean, we don't talk about mental efficiency or moral efficiency anymore. But its inheritance continues to be felt, with the unthinking blindness that treats efficiency and productivity as unchallengeable virtues. Efficiency makes sense as the property of a machine. As it moves into other systems, the gap between what is a machine and what is not a machine opens the space of politics, of social value, the aesthetics of living. And it mustn't be forgotten that efficiency is a term which is forged in the discourse of capitalism. It guarantees and demands dissatisfaction. Right? We're constantly being asked to drive towards more growth, greater accumulation, more efficiency, towards the impossible perfection, the nightmare of Franklin's virtue, where no time is lost. So what I'd like to suggest is the next time you wait impatiently for a train or bridle at your computer not quite working as you like, what might be a better virtue would be to reflect on what vectors of complicity inform your life in the city and how the affects, the emotions of urban living are ideologically formed. Thank you.